Story 1 of 10. I delivered a load to a warehouse that burned down 30 years ago. My name is Earl Beckett, and I have been hauling freight for 27 years. I have delivered to airports and shipping docks and cold storage facilities and suburban distribution centers and everything in between. I have backed into loading bays in the dark, in the rain, in weather conditions that would send most people indoors without a second thought. I know how warehouses work. I know what they smell like, what they sound like, how they feel at 2 in the morning when the dock crew is running on vending machine coffee, and the fluorescent lights hum with that particular flat frequency that never quite sounds like daylight. I know the difference between a real warehouse and something else, which is why what happened outside Beaumont, Texas, in September of 2019 is the experience I measure everything else against. The delivery came through normal channels. Dispatch sent me the BOL, bill of lading, and the delivery address the previous afternoon. A standard industrial load. Machine parts headed to a receiving facility. The address was on Refinery Road, a stretch I had run before, industrial corridor east of Beaumont, the kind of area that smells permanently of petrochemicals and has the flat, purposeful ugliness of places where actual work gets done. I did not look up the address beforehand. There was no reason to. I had a GPS, I had the paperwork, I had the delivery window. I pulled out at 11 p.m. for a 2 a.m. delivery time. The GPS took me off the main road about 8 miles from the city center, down a service access road that I had not been on before, but that looked entirely appropriate. Packed gravel, good width for a rig, the kind of road that has been driven by heavy trucks for decades and shows it. I followed it for perhaps a mile and a half before my headlights picked up the warehouse. It was a large structure, corrugated steel construction, the kind that went up all over the industrial Southwest in the 1970s and 1980s. Several loading docks on the south side, the receiving office windows lit up, dock lights on, a forklift visible inside the open bay nearest the road. Everything about it looked operational. A man in a high-visibility vest came out of the receiving office and waved me toward Bay 3. The hand signal's completely standard, the kind of direction I have received 1,000 times at 1,000 receiving docks. I backed in. The process was normal in every detail. The dock crew worked efficiently. Unloading my trailer with the forklift, the receiving clerk came out with a clipboard and had me sign the delivery confirmation. I want to be specific about this because it matters. I held a physical clipboard. I signed a physical document with a physical pen. The clerk tore off my copy and handed it to me. I took it. I put it in my shirt pocket. I do not believe I imagined this. I pulled out around 2:45 a.m. and drove back to the main road. I called dispatch to confirm the delivery and ask about my backhaul, which was my standard procedure. Dispatch confirmed receipt of my delivery confirmation in the system. The warehouse had logged it on their end, which was also standard. Everything checked out. I stopped for fuel and breakfast outside Beaumont around 4 a.m. Out of habit, I pulled up the delivery address on my phone to note it in my personal log, which I keep separately from the company records. The address came up on the map, but when I looked at the satellite view, the lot on Refinery Road showed not a warehouse, but a concrete slab, overgrown at the edges, surrounded by weeds that had been growing undisturbed for what the photograph suggested was many years. I switched to street view. The satellite image had not been wrong. The lot held a foundation slab and the remnant steel skeleton of a structure that had collapsed or been demolished, surrounded by vegetation that showed no recent disturbance. I called the delivery address. The number on my BOL rang to a disconnected tone. I called dispatch back and asked them to verify the address. They verified it, read it back to me exactly as I had it. I asked them to pull up a satellite image. A long pause. Then my dispatcher, a careful and experienced woman named Rhonda, who had been doing this job for 15 years, said very quietly, "Earl, that address shows a vacant lot. It's been vacant for a long time." I drove back out to Refinery Road the next morning, in daylight, because I needed to see it for myself. The access road was real. I found it where I had turned off the previous night. Packed gravel, wide enough for a truck, worn by heavy use. I followed it to the end. The concrete slab was there. The collapsed steel skeleton of the walls, rusted to a color that spoke of decades of neglect. Weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. No dock equipment, no receiving office, no forklift, no dock crew in high-visibility vests. I found, in my shirt pocket, a folded piece of paper. The delivery confirmation, signed with the date and time of my arrival, with a name in the signature line that I could read clearly. I took that paper to a records office in Beaumont and asked a clerk to help me search the county's business registration database for the company named on the confirmation. The company had been registered. Past tense. It had operated at that Refinery Road address from 1971 to 1989, when a fire destroyed the facility. No casualties, according to the news archive the clerk helped me find. But the structure was a total loss. The company dissolved the following year. The land had sat vacant since 1989. 30 years. 30 years since that warehouse burned, and on a night in September of 2019, I backed my truck into Bay 3, and a dock crew unloaded my freight, and a clerk handed me a signed delivery confirmation that I still have, that I carry in a plastic sleeve in my cab, that I look at sometimes when the road is long, and I need to remind myself that the world contains things I do not understand and have not yet found words for. The machine parts I delivered are somewhere. They had to go somewhere. I unloaded a real trailer into a real dock. The weight of the trailer changed when the forks took the pallets. The specific lightning that a driver feels through the whole rig when a load comes off. I felt it. I do not know what I delivered to, or what received it, or where the machine parts that left my trailer ended up. I know that something was there that night that the daylight shows no sign of. And I know, with a certainty that I cannot justify through any framework I possess, that whatever received my delivery has been receiving deliveries for 30 years since a fire ended it, and will perhaps continue receiving them for 30 more. I still run that general corridor. I have not taken another delivery to that address, and dispatch has not sent one. But I check every address now before I pull out, every time. I pull up the satellite view. I look at the street view. I make sure that what I am driving toward is something the world acknowledges exists. So far, everything is checked out, but I keep checking. Story 2 of 10. Something knocked on my trailer every night at 3:13 a.m. It started the first week of April and continued through the end of June, every night that I was on the road. Without a single exception across 83 consecutive nights of long-haul driving. Not every night that I parked in the same location. Not every night on the same route. Every night, regardless of where I was, from California to Ohio to the Florida Panhandle, at 3:13 a.m. 3 knocks on the rear left corner of my trailer. My name is Steve Pallister. I am 45, been driving for 18 years, and I want to tell you immediately that I know what knocking on a trailer sounds like from ordinary causes. Thermal expansion and contraction of the metal as temperatures change through the night. Debris from the road caught in the undercarriage and dislodged by settling. Animals, raccoons and possums, and occasionally larger animals, investigating the trailer exterior. I know all of these sounds, and I know the specific quality that distinguishes mechanical or animal cause from something deliberate. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. The specific rhythm and force of a human hand knocking on a door. The first night, I was parked at a Flying J in Barstow. I was awake when it happened. I am often awake around 3 a.m., my sleep schedule having long since adjusted to the rhythms of road life. And I was reading on my tablet when the knocks came. Distinct, clear, deliberate. 3 of them, from the rear left corner of my trailer. I checked the time. 3:13. I got out and looked. The lot was the usual 3 a.m. configuration. Other trucks parked, a few lights on in the travel center building. Nothing near my trailer, no person, no animal large enough to produce that sound. I walked the perimeter of the trailer. Nothing. I went back to my sleeper and did not sleep again that night. The second night, I was 800 miles away. I had driven my route that day, parked at a different facility entirely, eaten dinner, spoken with my wife on the phone, gone to bed with the complete assumption that whatever had happened in Barstow was a one-time oddity, with some explanation I simply had not identified. At 3:13 a.m., 3 knocks on the rear left corner of my trailer. I got out faster this time. I was at the rear left corner of the trailer within perhaps 15 seconds of the final knock. Nothing. A well-lit lot, good visibility, no person or animal visible within range. I noted the time in my log, 3:13. I noted that it was the second consecutive night. By the end of the first week, 7 nights, 7 sets of 3 knocks at 3:13 a.m. from 7 different locations across 4 different states. I had stopped trying to catch whatever was doing it immediately after the fact, and had begun setting up my external camera. My truck has a dash cam, but I rigged a secondary camera aimed at the rear left corner of the trailer, running continuously through the night, set to timestamp every frame. The camera recorded the knocking, by which I mean the camera recorded the sound of 3 deliberate knocks on the rear left corner of the trailer at 3:13 a.m. The audio was clear. You could hear the specific tone of impact on the metal, the even spacing, the 3-knock rhythm. What the camera did not show, in any frame, was a source. The rear left corner of my trailer, filmed at 3:13 a.m., showed nothing touching it. No hand, no object, no disturbance of any kind. 3 knocks on the audio track, and on the video track, an empty corner of a trailer sitting in a dark lot. I had the recording analyzed by 2 people with video editing backgrounds, asking them specifically to look for any sign of impact or disturbance in the frames corresponding to the knocking sounds. Both of them confirmed what I already knew. The video showed nothing. The sound was real. They confirmed the audio was not distorted or synthesized, and the visual record showed the corner of a trailer that nothing was touching. I began keeping detailed notes. The knocks came every night, without exception. Always 3:13 a.m., always rear left corner, always 3 knocks evenly spaced. No variation, no escalation, no additional sounds, no further interaction of any kind. Just 3 knocks at 3:13, and then silence. The pattern broke once. On the 41st night, the knocks did not come at 3:13. I was awake, waiting for them, watching the clock. 3:13 came and passed. 3:14. 3:15. I had begun to think, with something that was equal parts relief and unexpected disappointment, that the pattern had ended. At 3:16, the knocks came. 3 of them, the same as every other night, from the same corner. 3 minutes late. I checked my phone clock against the truck's clock against the time displayed on the tablet I kept running in the cab. All 3 showed 3:16. I do not know what to make of the 3-minute deviation. I do not know if it means anything or if it is simply the first variation in a pattern that was, on 82 other nights, absolutely consistent. The knocking stopped on June 28th. I was parked in Memphis, and I woke at 3:30 because I had been sleeping in genuine anticipation of the 3:13 wake and had simply slept through it. I checked my recording. Nothing. No sound. The rear left corner of my trailer on camera. The timestamp running through 3:13 and past it without event. I do not know what changed on June 28th. I do not know what started on the first week of April. I know that something knocked on my trailer 83 consecutive times, at the same time from the same location, leaving no physical evidence, and that whatever it wanted, if it wanted anything, if intention is even the right framework for something like this, it stopped wanting it in late June and has not returned. I still check the time when I wake in the night. Old habit now, developed across 3 months of 3:13 wake-ups. I look at the clock and then at the camera feed. So far, the trailer corner is always empty at 3:13, always quiet. But I leave the camera running every night, just in case it comes back, and I can ask it finally what it was trying to tell me. Story 3 of 10. The rest stop had no exit, and no one could leave. I want to tell you about a rest stop in Kentucky that you will not find on any map, on any highway app, or in any state transportation database, because I have looked, and it is not there. It is not there in any official record. But I was in it for 6 hours in October of 2020, and there were 11 other vehicles in it with me, and none of us could leave until something changed that I still cannot identify or explain. My name is Bobby Crane. I am 52, been driving freight for 23 years, and I am not a person given to either exaggeration or the kind of storytelling that improves with each telling. I am going to give you the facts as I recorded them, because I had the presence of mind during those 6 hours to write down everything I observed, and my notes from that night are the most accurate record I have. I pulled into the rest area at approximately 11:40 p.m. on Interstate 65 southbound, somewhere in central Kentucky. The facility was standard. A parking area with designated truck and car sections, a low building housing restrooms and vending machines, good overhead lighting, the usual configuration. 3 other trucks were already parked when I arrived, and 2 passenger vehicles. Normal. I used the facilities, bought a coffee from the vending machine, returned to my truck, and was preparing to pull back onto the highway when I noticed that the exit lane was not where it should be. Rest areas on Interstate 65 in Kentucky have a standard configuration. You enter from the right, follow a one-way loop past the building, and exit back onto the highway via a second on-ramp. I had used rest areas on this stretch before and knew the general layout. But when I looked toward the exit end of the parking area where the on-ramp should have been, there was no ramp. The pavement simply ended, giving way to a dark tree line approximately 50 yards from the last parking space. I assumed I had misjudged the layout in the dark, that the exit was at a different point in the loop than I was remembering. I started my engine and drove slowly through the lot, following the pavement. It did loop, but it looped back to the entrance, which was also not an entrance anymore. Where the highway entrance had been, there was the same dark tree line. Pavement ending cleanly. No on-ramp, no highway visible or audible beyond the trees. I heard Interstate 65. The sound of highway traffic is distinctive, and I was hearing it from somewhere beyond the tree line. But the trees were dense enough that no lights were visible through them. The highway was there. I could not reach it. I got out and spoke to the driver of the truck parked nearest me. He had arrived about 20 minutes before me and had been trying to leave for 15 of those minutes. He had tried driving to where the exit should be, found the tree line, and had gotten out to try to walk through to the highway. The trees, he said, did not give. He had pushed into them for perhaps 10 yards before something in the quality of the dark ahead of him had made him stop and come back. Over the next 2 hours, the rest area acquired additional occupants. 4 more trucks and 3 more passenger vehicles, all pulling in through what had been the entrance, all discovering, when they tried to leave, that the exit did not exist. By 2 a.m., the rest area held 12 vehicles and 14 people. We had established that the highway was audible but inaccessible, that cell service was available. We could make calls, send texts, access the internet, but that any attempt to communicate our location to emergency services produced a response from dispatchers who could find no rest area at our described mile marker location. I called my dispatcher. She searched her routing information and confirmed that there was no rest area at my stated location, that the nearest rest area on I-65 southbound was 11 miles from where I believed I was. I told her I was sitting in a rest area that, according to her information, did not exist. She was quiet for a moment, and then suggested I might have taken a wrong turn and ended up in a private facility. I explained that I had entered from I-65 southbound with no turn, and that the facility had the specific configuration and signage of a state rest area. We waited. There was nothing else to do. 14 people in a rest area that was not on any map, that the highway could not be accessed from, surrounded by trees that apparently could not be walked through. We talked among ourselves, shared what information we had, which amounted to very little. Nobody had any explanation. The most experienced driver in the group, a man of perhaps 60, who had been driving for 35 years, said he had heard of something like this happening once before, from another driver, years ago, somewhere in the Midwest. He did not remember the details. He said the other driver had not been able to explain it either, only that they had eventually been able to leave when the situation resolved itself. At approximately 5:40 a.m., something changed. I cannot tell you what changed, because I observed nothing. There was no sound, no shift in the light, no perceptible event of any kind. But at 5:40, one of the drivers who had been periodically checking the exit end of the lot called out that the on-ramp was there. I drove to it. The on-ramp was there. Interstate 65 was there, visible and accessible. The ordinary highway doing what ordinary highways do in the early morning, carrying the first light traffic of a Kentucky dawn. I drove onto the highway. All the other vehicles followed, one by one, until the rest area held only the permanent fixtures of a rest stop that, once we had all left it, presumably ceased to exist in any accessible form. I pulled over at the next legitimate rest area, 11 miles south, and spent 30 minutes writing down everything I had experienced in as much detail as I could manage. I still have those notes. I have checked the mile marker where the event occurred against Kentucky DOT records many times in the years since. There is no rest area at that location, has never been one, and the tree line on the satellite image of that mile marker looks exactly like the tree line I remember. I do not know what held us there for 6 hours. I do not know what released us when it did. I know only that 14 people shared the experience and were, as far as I am aware, equally unable to explain it. I have occasionally searched online for other accounts from drivers who were in that rest area that night. I have found nothing. Perhaps the others chose not to write about it. Perhaps they explained it to themselves in terms I have not been able to locate. Perhaps the thing about experiences that cannot be explained is that most people, for very understandable reasons, eventually choose not to go on looking for the explanation. I am still looking. Not for the rest area. I have no desire to stop there again. And I drive past the relevant mile marker without looking toward the tree line when my route takes me that way. I am looking for the pattern. For what kind of thing traps 14 people in a rest stop for 6 hours at a stretch of interstate that records show nothing there, and then lets them go just before dawn? I suspect I will not find it, but I keep driving, and I keep my notes. Story 4 of 10. I found my own truck abandoned on an empty highway. My truck was in my driveway. I know this with absolute certainty because I had left it there myself 3 days earlier, after completing a haul and coming home for a scheduled 48-hour rest period. I had parked it in the driveway, my driveway, at my house, where I have parked that truck dozens of times, disconnected the trailer at the yard, driven the cab home, and gone inside. 3 days later, after my rest period plus one additional day off that I took because I was tired and had the hours available, I was driving a rental car back to the yard to pick up my trailer when I saw my truck. My name is Kevin Larkin. I am 43, been driving for 17 years, and the truck I am describing is a 2019 Kenworth T680, burgundy, with a specific set of chrome stack covers I added myself, and a small dent in the passenger side step that happened in a tight dock situation 2 years ago, and that I kept meaning to repair. It is recognizably mine in a way that goes beyond the license plate, which I also checked, which was also mine. My truck was on an empty stretch of US 6 in western Nebraska, pulled onto the shoulder, engine off, driver's door hanging open. I had not been to western Nebraska in 3 weeks. I had driven a Missouri to Colorado haul 10 days earlier, which took me nowhere near the specific stretch of US 6, where I now saw my truck sitting on the shoulder. My truck had been in my driveway, which is in Kansas City, for 3 days. I had seen it there that morning when I left for the yard. I pulled the rental car over behind it. I approached. The cab was empty. The engine was cold, not recently stopped, but cold, the way an engine gets after sitting for a long time in November weather. The driver's door was open. The logbook was on the passenger seat, open to the current week. I picked it up. The entries in the logbook for the past 3 days, the days I had been home resting, were filled in my handwriting, detailing a haul I had not made to destinations I had not visited through Nebraska, which I had not entered. The entries were complete, professional, exactly the kind of log entries I make for every day of driving, with nothing about them that suggested forgery or outside authorship. They looked exactly like what I produce every day of my working life. My phone was also in the cab, on the seat beside the logbook. My personal phone, which I had been using at home for the past 3 days, which I was actively using, which was in my jacket pocket, was also on the passenger seat of my truck in Nebraska. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I looked at it. I looked at the phone on the seat. Identical. Same case, same scratch screen protector with the chip in the lower left corner. I picked up the phone on the seat. Its battery was dead. I do not carry 2 phones. I have never carried 2 phones. I have 1 phone, 1 number, 1 device. I was looking at 2 identical versions of it. One in my hand, charged and operational and containing the text messages and call history of the past 3 days in Kansas City, and one on the seat of my truck, dead, in a location in Nebraska where I had not been. I called my wife from the phone in my hand. I asked her whether she had seen me leave the house that morning. She said yes. She had seen me at breakfast. We had spoken. I had driven away in the rental car at approximately 8:30 a.m. My phone, she meant the phone in my hand, had been in my possession throughout. I called my dispatcher and told her where I was and what I had found. I described the situation without interpretation, giving only the facts. I was on US 6 in western Nebraska. My truck was here. I had not driven it here. The logbook showed 3 days of entries I had not made. My dispatcher was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me that the company's GPS tracking system showed my truck had been stationary in my Kansas City driveway for the past 3 days, which was consistent with my account and entirely inconsistent with the truck's current location in Nebraska. The truck was towed to a Kenworth dealer for inspection. Everything was mechanically normal. The engine hours matched what I knew, roughly, except that there were approximately 6 more hours of engine runtime than I could account for based on my own usage, hours that corresponded, in terms of when they had been logged, to the 3 days I had been at home. 6 hours of engine runtime, logged to a truck that its own GPS tracker showed had not moved. I never drove my truck to Nebraska. I know this the way I know the other fixed facts of my life, my name, my address, my wife's voice. I did not make those logbook entries. I have compared them against 3 years of my own logs, and they are indistinguishable from my own handwriting. But I did not write them. I have 2 working theories, and I hold both of them loosely because neither fully satisfies me. The first is that something used my truck for 3 days, drove it across Nebraska, filled out my logbook in a reproduction of my handwriting precise enough to be indistinguishable from the original, and left it on a highway's shoulder with the door open as if inviting me to find it. The second is that some version of me made that trip, a version I have no memory of, that ran parallel to the version of me sitting at my kitchen table in Kansas City for 3 days, living what I experience as my continuous and unbroken life. I do not know which theory frightens me more. I lean toward the second one on bad nights, because a thing using my truck is external to me. But a version of myself I have no access to or memory of suggests something about the nature of consciousness and continuity that I find genuinely destabilizing to contemplate. I still have both phones. The dead one charged up normally when I got it home and appeared to contain no data. A factory-fresh device, identical to mine in every physical way, with no history, no contacts, no memory of ever having been used. I keep it in a drawer. I do not know why I keep it. Evidence of something, even if I cannot say what. Story 5 of 10. The night shift dispatcher was already dead. I talked to her 3 nights a week for almost 2 months. Her name was Lena Vogt, and she had the night dispatch shift at the regional freight company I was contracting with during the winter of 2021 and early 2022. I am going to describe those conversations accurately, and then I am going to tell you what I learned about Lena Vogt in February of 2022. And I want you to hold both sets of facts simultaneously, because that is the only way to understand why I have not worked a night haul since. My name is Aaron Price. I am 38, driving for 11 years, and until this experience, I was the kind of driver who preferred night hauls, less traffic, cooler temperatures in summer, a particular quality of freedom that long, empty highways have between midnight and dawn that they do not have at any other hour. I do not prefer night hauls anymore. I do them when I have to, and I do not enjoy them, and I want to tell you exactly why. Lena Vogt was professional, efficient, and pleasant in the manner of someone who had been doing this job for a long time, and had found the particular balance between personal warmth and professional efficiency that makes a dispatcher good at their work. She knew the routes. She knew the traffic patterns and the construction delays and the wait station schedules. She had a specific, dry sense of humor that surfaced occasionally on longer calls, when the logistics conversation had been handled and there was still time before the next check-in. She called me Aaron rather than Price, which not all dispatchers do. I liked talking to her. Over the course of 8 weeks, across perhaps 20 or 25 phone calls, I built what felt like a genuine working relationship with Lena Vogt. Not a friendship, we were a contract driver and a night dispatcher. We never met in person, and the structure of the work did not encourage personal disclosure. But a collegial relationship, the kind that develops naturally when you talk to the same person 3 nights a week about shared professional concerns. She mentioned, over those weeks, various things about herself. She had been in freight dispatch for 12 years. She had 2 dogs, large ones. She mentioned them occasionally. She lived in the city where the company's regional office was located. She did not particularly like the night shift hours, but had taken the position for reasons she did not elaborate on. In February of 2022, I was preparing to renew my contract with the company and called the main office to speak with operations management about the terms. In the course of that conversation, I mentioned that I had been working well with the night dispatcher, that the communication had been good, and that I hoped to continue with the same team. The operations manager was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me which dispatcher I had been working with on nights. I said, "Lena Vogt." The silence on the other end of the line was long enough that I asked if I had the name wrong. "Lena Vogt worked the night dispatch here," the operations manager said carefully. "She did, for about 12 years. She passed away last September. Heart attack. She had been gone for several months before you started contracting with us." I asked her to repeat this. She did. Lena Vogt had died in September of 2021. I had begun contracting with the company in November of 2021, 2 months after her death, and had spoken with someone identifying themselves as Lena Vogt in the night dispatch role throughout December 2021 and January 2022. I asked who had actually been taking the night dispatch calls during that period. The operations manager, who was now speaking with the careful tone of someone managing an unexpected and unsettling situation, said she would look into it and call me back. She called back the following day. The company's phone records showed that the night dispatch line had received and made calls during the periods I described. The calls were logged. My calls appeared in the system. But the records did not show a named dispatcher assigned to those shifts. There was an administrative gap in the assignment records for the November through January period, a gap that the operations manager said she could not immediately explain and was escalating to their IT and HR departments. The company has not provided me with a further explanation, despite my follow-up inquiries. They have attributed the situation to an administrative error, which does not explain who was on those calls, who answered with Lena Vogt's name, who knew the routes and the schedules, and had the dry sense of humor and mentioned the large dogs. I have asked myself whether the voice I spoke with was Lena Vogt in any meaningful sense, whether whatever she was in those months of phone calls bore any relationship to the person who had worked that job for 12 years and died in September. I do not have a framework for answering this question. I know that the voice was professional, helpful, and conducted itself exactly as I would expect a good night dispatcher to conduct themselves. I know that on several occasions, she helped me navigate real-time traffic and weather challenges in ways that genuinely served my work. I know that she was, by the company's records, not alive during any of our conversations. I have thought about what she might have been doing in those months of night shifts after her death. Whether some version of professional habit, 12 years of established pattern, continued operating at the desk she had occupied for so long. Whether she knew she was dead. Whether the 2 dogs were waiting for her somewhere that I cannot locate on any map. I hope they are. I hope, wherever she is, something is waiting for her. She was good at her job. She deserved better than to go on doing it alone in the dark, fielding calls from drivers who didn't know she was gone. Story 6 of 10. My dashcam recorded a passenger I never picked up. I have reviewed this footage more than 100 times. I have shown it to my wife, my dispatcher, 2 friends who work in video production, a mechanic who knows my truck's electrical system, and 1 person who describes themselves as a paranormal investigator, whose opinion I solicited out of desperation rather than conviction. Every person who has watched this footage has confirmed what I see in it, and no person who has watched it has been able to explain it. I am going to describe it as accurately as I can, because accuracy is the only tool I have left. My name is Marcus Webb, and I have been driving for 15 years, running long-haul, primarily Midwestern routes. My truck has a dual-channel dash cam, forward-facing and cabin-facing, recording continuously, with timestamps and GPS coordinates embedded in the footage. I installed the second channel, the cabin-facing camera, 2 years ago, at the recommendation of my insurance company, which offered a small discount for interior monitoring on long-haul vehicles. I thought very little about it at the time. I think about it a great deal now. The footage I am describing was recorded on November 14th of last year, on Interstate 70 westbound in Kansas, between approximately 1 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. I was alone in the truck, as I am on every haul. I am a solo driver. I have never picked up passengers. My company's policy explicitly prohibits it, and I have followed that policy without exception throughout my career. The cabin-facing camera recorded, throughout that 2.5-hour stretch, a passenger in the seat beside me. Not a suggestion of a passenger. Not an ambiguous shape that could be interpreted as a reflection or a shadow. A person sitting in the passenger seat, visible from the mid-chest up as the camera angle captures, facing generally forward, occasionally moving in the small ways that people move when they are sitting for extended periods. A shift of position, a slight turn of the head. The footage shows this person with the kind of clarity you would expect from a functional cabin camera under normal nighttime driving conditions. Not sharp, but clear enough to see that there is a person there, to identify basic features of clothing and posture, to observe the small, continuous movements of a living presence. I was not aware of this person during the drive. I have thought about this extensively, because it is the most difficult aspect of the footage to reconcile with my understanding of my own experience. I was awake, alert. I had checked in with dispatch at 1:30 a.m., and the recording confirms I was speaking coherently, tracking the road conditions, entirely functional. I had coffee. I had the radio. I was not in any state I can identify as compromised. And throughout that 2.5 hours, I was apparently driving with a person in the seat beside me, a presence I did not perceive in any way. I have been asked, by everyone who has seen the footage, whether the passenger might be an artifact, a reflection from inside the cab, a camera anomaly, some kind of electronic ghost produced by a malfunctioning recording system. I want to address this as rigorously as I can. The figure in the footage responds to changes in the cab's interior lighting in the way a physical object would respond, not the way a reflection or an artifact responds. When I turned on an interior light briefly at approximately 2:15 a.m., the footage confirms this. I turned on the map light to check something on my phone mount. The figure in the passenger seat becomes more clearly visible in the increased light, resolving into slightly sharper detail, exactly as a physically present person would. The figure also, at one point, turns its head. I want to be precise about this. At 2:43 a.m., the figure in the passenger seat, which has been facing generally forward for the previous 90 minutes, turns its head to the right, toward the window, for approximately 8 seconds, before returning to its previous forward-facing position. This is the footage I return to most often. This is the footage I find most difficult. An artifact does not turn its head. I have had the camera inspected and tested. It is functioning correctly. The footage is authentic. The video production professionals I consulted found no evidence of manipulation in the file data. Confirmed the timestamps and GPS coordinates as consistent with my known route. and could not identify any technical explanation for the figure. I do not know who was in my truck between 1 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. on Interstate 70 in Kansas. I do not know why I could not perceive them. I do not know whether they are something I should be frightened of or something I should be grateful for. A presence watching over a sleeping highway in the dark hours. A companion I was not aware of, but that was, apparently, there. The second channel of my dash cam is still running. Every night I drive, the cabin-facing camera records the interior of my cab. I review the footage every morning now, before I look at the road footage, before I do my inspection, before I do anything. I look at the passenger seat in the footage from the previous night, and I check whether anyone was there. So far, since November 14th, every night's footage shows an empty passenger seat. Just me, driving, alone, the way I have always driven. I cannot tell you whether this is a relief or a disappointment, and my uncertainty on that point is, perhaps, the strangest thing about this entire experience. Story 7 of 10. The fog brought back every trucker who vanished here. I have been driving the stretch of highway between Medford and Klamath Falls in southern Oregon for 14 years. And in those 14 years I have heard, from other drivers who run the same corridor, 11 separate accounts of drivers who went into the mountain fog on that route and did not come out the other side. Not all 11 accounts are verified. Some are second or third hand, the kind of story that circulates through truck stop conversation and may have grown in the retelling. But 3 of them I know personally. Drivers I had met and spoken with and whose disappearances were reported to the police and investigated and never resolved. My name is Tom Aldrich. I am 57 and have driven the Pacific Northwest routes for my entire career, which means I have spent more time in the fog systems that move through the Cascade Range than I can calculate with any precision. I know mountain fog. I know its behavior and its limits, and the way it can trap a driver and the way it can release them. I know the difference between fog that is simply dangerous and fog that is something else. What I encountered on a night in October of 2022 on the Medford to Klamath Falls stretch was something else. The fog came in from the east, which was unusual for that corridor. The fog systems I knew on that route came typically from the coast, working their way inland and up the mountain grades. This fog came from the wrong direction and had a quality I could not categorize against my experience. Too dense, too uniform, carrying a specific cold that was distinct from the ambient temperature, as if the fog itself were generating cold rather than simply carrying it. I slowed appropriately and engaged my fog lights. Standard protocol. The visibility dropped to perhaps 30 feet ahead of me, which was manageable, and I was settling into the careful, attentive pace that fog demands when I saw the first truck. It was pulled onto the shoulder, facing the wrong direction, facing east toward Medford, on the westbound side. Running lights on, no hazards. Engine apparently running. I slowed further and looked at the cab as I passed. There was a driver inside. I could see the silhouette against the cab's interior lighting. I keyed my CB. I called out on Channel 19, the standard trucker frequency, asking if the driver on the shoulder needed assistance. No response. A quarter-mile further, another truck. Also pulled over, also facing the wrong direction, also apparently occupied. I called again on the CB. Nothing. Over the next 3 miles, I counted 7 trucks on the shoulder, all facing east when they should have been facing west, all showing running lights, all apparently with drivers inside. None of them responded to my CB calls. None of them moved. I began to recognize some of the trucks. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I know the reliability of identification under stressful conditions in poor visibility, and I do not want to overstate my certainty. But I recognized specific details on two of the trucks I passed, a distinctive paint scheme on one, a specific custom chrome detail on another, that I associated with trucks belonging to drivers I knew had disappeared on this route. One of them had been missing for 3 years, one for 7. I drove through the fog section without stopping. This was a decision I made in the moment that I have since questioned extensively. But in the moment, it was the decision I made. To keep moving, to get through, to not stop in a fog that had somehow populated the shoulder of a mountain highway with the trucks of missing drivers facing the wrong direction. I came out the other end of the fog section approximately 6 miles later. The night was clear. I pulled over and sat for 20 minutes, then called the state police and reported what I had seen. Trucks on the shoulder, drivers apparently inside. No CB response. The responding trooper who took the call told me she would send a unit to check the area. She called me back 45 minutes later. The unit had driven the stretch I described. The shoulder was empty. No trucks, no drivers, no evidence of vehicles having been parked there. I have driven that route many times since. I have not encountered fog of that quality again on that stretch. Though the route has its normal fog events and I handle them normally, I have not seen any truck on the shoulder facing the wrong direction, occupied or otherwise. But I think about the 7 trucks and the 2 I thought I recognized and what the fog was doing with them. Whether it was showing me something that existed in some other layer of the road's history. All the drivers who went into fog on that corridor and did not come out. Preserved somewhere in the mountain cold, sitting in their cabs facing back the way they came, waiting for something. Whether the fog, on certain nights, in certain conditions, briefly makes them visible to whoever passes through. A glimpse of the ones the highway kept. I do not know if this is comfort or horror. I think it might be both. I drive past the stretch in daylight when I can manage the timing. The mountain road in daylight, with the valley visible below and the Cascades above, is beautiful in the specific, hard-edged way of Pacific Northwest terrain, and nothing about it suggests anything other than what it is. A road through mountains, entirely ordinary, going where it is supposed to go. I try to remember that when I drive it at night. I try to remember the daylight version. I keep my CB on channel 19, and I listen, and I do not stop. And I keep my eyes on the road ahead rather than on the shoulder, where the wrong direction trucks might or might not be sitting in their own fog, running their lights in the dark, waiting for a call that comes through as silence. Story 8 of 10. A little boy asked me to drive him home. His house was a cemetery. I need you to understand, before I tell you this, that I am a father. I have 2 daughters, 9 and 12. And whatever instinct drives a person to protect a child they don't know is an instinct I have in full measure. I say this because when I saw the boy standing at the roadside, the first thing I felt was not curiosity or unease, but concern. The direct, parental concern of an adult who sees a child alone, somewhere a child should not be. I want you to understand that everything I did because I was trying to help. My name is Carlos Rivera. I am 41, been driving for 13 years, run primarily southern routes through Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. This happened on US 90 in Mississippi on a warm night in July of 2021, in a stretch of road between 2 small towns with about 15 miles of rural nothing in between. He was standing at the edge of the road, maybe 8 years old, in pajamas. Blue pajamas with a pattern I couldn't make out from distance, standing on the shoulder of a state highway at 11:30 at night. No adult visible anywhere. No car stopped nearby. Just a small boy standing at the edge of the road in pajamas, looking at my headlights as I approached. I stopped. I got out. I crouched down to be at eye level with him, the way you approach a child you don't know. And I asked if he was okay, where his parents were, how he had come to be there. He was calm. Not the calm of a child in shock, not the flat affect of trauma, but a genuine, settled calm that was itself slightly unusual. Most children alone at a roadside at night, in my experience and imagination, would be frightened. He looked at me with dark eyes and said his name was Daniel, and he needed to get home. I asked where home was. He told me he would show me. I made the decision that many drivers, looking back, would say was the wrong one. I let him into the truck. I know the arguments against this. I have made those arguments to myself many times in the years since. But he was a child alone on a highway at midnight, and I was not willing to drive away from that. He directed me with simple, confident instructions. Turn here, keep going, turn here again. That took me off US 90 onto smaller roads, the kind that gets smaller as you go. From state road to county road, to what became essentially a lane through pine trees. He sat in the passenger seat with his hands folded in his lap and directed me without any sign of uncertainty or hesitation. After perhaps 8 miles of this, he said, "Here." I pulled over. To my left, a gate. Iron, old, the specific decorative ironwork of a cemetery gate, with letters arched across the top that I could read in my headlights. Piney Grove Memorial. I looked at the gate. I looked at the boy. He was looking at the cemetery gate with an expression I have turned over in my memory many times. Not sad, not frightened. Something closer to recognition. The specific quality of arriving somewhere familiar. "This is your home?" I said. I want to be honest that my voice was not entirely steady. "I live here," he said. Not with the phrase, "I live here," meaning he resided in a house nearby. With the specific, unqualified meaning of the words as I have written them. He lived there. The cemetery. He looked at me. "Thank you for bringing me," he said. It was the most ordinary, polite sentence. The kind a child says when they've been given a ride, when an adult has done them a kindness. "Thank you for bringing me." He opened the truck door and got out. He walked to the cemetery gate, which swung open as he approached, or I thought it did. But visibility was poor beyond my headlights, and I may have been wrong about whether the gate was already open. He went through it. I watched him walk between the headstones, his blue pajamas visible for perhaps 30 seconds before the darkness between the stones absorbed him. I sat in my truck for a long time. Then I got out and went to the gate. It was locked, padlocked, with a chain that showed no sign of recent use, the links filmed with rust. The lock itself had the specific immovability of something that had not been opened in a long time. I looked through the gate into the cemetery. I could not see the boy. I could see headstones, the oldest ones nearest the gate, and one of them, visible in the peripheral reach of my headlights, had a small stone marker with a name on it that I walked close enough to read. Daniel. A child's name, a child's dates. The second date 60 years ago. I drove back to US 90. I called my wife from the main road. I did not tell her what I had seen, not that night. It was past midnight, and I didn't have the words for it yet. I told her I was fine, that I was on my route, that I would call in the morning. I have told this story to very few people, and of the few I have told, most have offered interpretations that I find inadequate. That the boy was a runaway I misidentified. That the cemetery marker I read in poor light was not Daniel's name. That the locked gate was a gate I was not remembering correctly. I have entertained all of these interpretations. What I cannot entertain, what I cannot make fit any of them, is the quality of that final phrase. Thank you for bringing me. The specific, satisfied finality of it. The quality of a journey completed, a destination reached. Whatever Daniel was, wherever he came from, he needed to get somewhere. And I brought him. I hope it was the right thing to do. I hope, wherever he is on the other side of that gate, he found what he was looking for, or what was waiting for him, or simply the particular peace of being home. Story 9 of 10. The bridge wasn't on any map, but my GPS kept taking me there. The GPS took me to the bridge the first time in February. I assumed it was a routing error and corrected it manually and thought nothing more about it. It took me there again in March and again in April, through 3 different GPS systems running on 3 different devices across 2 different routes that had no logical reason to route through that particular crossing. By May, I had stopped assuming it was an error. My name is Donna Whitfield. I am 48, been driving heavy haul for 19 years, specializing in the kind of oversized and sensitive loads that require route planning and advanced surveys and take considerably more logistical coordination than standard freight. I am meticulous about route verification. I have to be. Carrying an oversized load on an unverified route can be dangerous in ways that go beyond the ordinary hazards of freight trucking. I do not take unknown bridges. I survey every crossing in advance. I check weight ratings, clearance heights, structural conditions. The bridge was not on any map I could find. Not the county maps, not the State Transportation Authority's bridge inventory, not any online mapping service at any level of zoom. The road that approached it from both sides existed in official records. A county road that ran through agricultural land. But the gap in that road, the gap spanned by the bridge, appeared in every official record as simply a gap. A road that ended at a creek bank on one side and resumed on the other, with no crossing between them. The bridge itself was a steel truss construction, the kind that was common in rural areas from the 1920s through the 1950s, wide enough for a single vehicle, with timber decking that showed the kind of weathering consistent with decades of use. It looked sound, but old. I am not a structural engineer, but I have been over enough bridges to have developed a functional sense of structural integrity, and this bridge looked like it had been doing its job for a long time and would continue doing so. I did not cross it the first 4 times the GPS took me there. I stopped at the approach, saw the unmapped bridge, consulted my maps to confirm it should not exist, turned around, and found an alternate crossing. This is what professional practice required, and I followed professional practice. The 5th time, I was running late. A delivery deadline that I was already stretching, an alternate route that would add an additional 40 minutes. A bridge that, though officially non-existent, looked structurally sound and was in front of me. I made the professional calculation and I drove across it. The crossing took approximately 90 seconds. The timber decking held without complaint under my weight, which I had estimated at well within any reasonable load limit for a bridge of this construction. The steel structure showed no distress. I crossed the creek, which ran maybe 10 feet below, clear water over a graveled bottom, and came off the other end onto the county road that resumed there. That was when I saw the marker. On the far side of the bridge, on the right, a wooden post with a hand-lettered sign. Old wood, old lettering, the paint faded to near illegibility, but still readable. Millbrook Bridge, built 1931. For those who need crossing. I stopped and photographed the sign. I photographed the bridge. I completed my delivery and on the return trip went back to the bridge. It was gone. Not damaged, not collapsed. gone. The creek was there. The county road approached it from both sides, and the gap where the bridge had been was simply a gap. The same gap shown in every official record. The gap that officially contained no crossing. The signpost was gone. The timber decking was gone. The steel truss was gone. I have researched the name Millbrook Bridge in the county records. There is no record of a bridge by that name in that county, no record of a 1931 construction at that location, no historical documentation of any crossing at that point on that creek. The GPS has not taken me back to that road since. I have tried to route through it deliberately, typing the county road designation into 3 different navigation systems, and all 3 of them route me away from that specific segment, finding other paths without my asking them to, as if the road itself has dropped from their databases. I think about the sign sometimes. For those who need crossing, the specific, deliberate phrasing of it, the suggestion of a bridge that exists not as permanent infrastructure, but as a conditional provision, available when needed, invisible when not. Present for the person running late on a February deadline, and unavailable to the surveyor checking county records. I wonder how many other drivers have been routed to that bridge by GPS systems that seem to be malfunctioning, and how many of them crossed, and whether they all found it gone on the return trip, and whether they all found, on the far side, the sign with its old lettering and its specific, ancient hospitality. For those who need crossing. As if the bridge had been built in 1931, not for the county's transportation infrastructure, but for something less official and more durable. The simple provision of a way across for whoever finds themselves, on a particular day, needing one. I still run that general corridor. I have not been rerouted to that creek crossing since. But I watch my GPS more carefully than I once did, alert for the specific moment when a routing decision makes no logical sense, and the road ahead is something I cannot find on any map. And I remind myself that unmapped does not necessarily mean unsafe, and that some infrastructure serves purposes older than the county's records. Story 10 of 10. Every midnight, my fuel gauge filled by itself. I want to start with what I know for certain, because certainty is in short supply when I try to think about this experience, and I want to be rigorous about what I can actually establish versus what I am inferring. What I know for certain. During a period of 41 consecutive driving days between September and October of 2022, my truck's fuel gauge, regardless of what level it showed at 11:59 p.m., showed a full tank at 12:01 a.m. I know this because I documented it every night, photographing the gauge at 11:55 p.m. and again at 12:05 a.m. 41 times. The before photographs show varying fuel levels, sometimes nearly empty, sometimes half full, once only a few miles from empty, at which point I was genuinely concerned about making the next fuel stop. The after photographs, taken 10 minutes later, show a full gauge every single time. What I know for certain, I did not fuel up during those 10-minute intervals on any of the 41 nights. I know this because I was in my cab for all of them, watching. I did not leave the truck. No one approached my truck. The fuel happened with no external intervention that I observed. What I know for certain, the fuel was real. I know this because I drove on it. A full tank of diesel does not appear as a full reading on a gauge. While the actual tank is empty, you would run out of fuel within miles. I drove a full tank's worth of miles after each midnight filling, on fuel that should not have been there. My name is Lawrence Kim. I am 36, been driving for 9 years. And I want to say that I approach this experience the way I approach mechanical problems with my truck, systematically. Looking for the explanation that is both consistent with the evidence and as simple as possible. I had the fuel system inspected. The inspection found the tank holding its capacity normally, the gauge calibrated correctly, the fuel lines clear. Nothing in the truck's mechanical configuration could produce a spontaneous change in the fuel level of the kind I was documenting. I considered whether I was misreading the gauge. I tested my gauge reading against actual tank fills at fuel stations on multiple occasions during the 41 days, confirming that my gauge reading corresponded to actual fuel levels within the normal range of gauge accuracy. I was not misreading the gauge. I installed an external fuel level monitor, a secondary device independent of the truck's own systems, logging tank level continuously. Its logs confirmed what my photographs showed. A consistent fill to maximum capacity at midnight every night for 41 nights. On the 42nd night, it did not happen. The gauge sat at whatever level it had been throughout the night, neither increasing nor decreasing beyond the expected consumption. The 41-night sequence simply ended, with no transition and no explanation. I have calculated the total fuel involved across 41 midnight fills, accounting for what the tank already held at midnight on each night, and adding what would have been needed to bring it to full. The number is substantial enough that I have not shared it with my company because I could not explain it. And unexplained fuel savings are the kind of thing that attracts the wrong kind of attention. I have thought extensively about what was fueling my truck. Not in a romantic or spiritual sense, but in the most literal possible sense. Something was putting diesel fuel into my tank every midnight for 41 nights. Something that had no physical form I could observe, that left no trace of its process, that stopped as abruptly as it started. The only theory I have been able to construct that I don't immediately reject is this: that something, whatever occupied or accompanied my truck during that period, wanted me to keep driving. That it had, for reasons I cannot identify, an interest in my continued movement, and that fueling the truck was the most practical way to ensure I would not stop. Not a direction, not a destination, simply the maintenance of motion. I found this theory, when I first arrived at it, deeply uncomfortable. The idea of being kept moving by something that did not identify itself and offered no explanation, only the continuing provision of what I needed to continue, implied a relationship I had not consented to and could not understand. But the more I sat with it, the more I found something else in it alongside the discomfort. A kind of companionship. Whatever was filling my tank every midnight had decided, for 41 nights, that my continued driving was worth maintaining. That I was going somewhere worth going. That the motion had value. I do not know if this is true. I do not know what I was going toward during those 41 days, or what ended when the filling stopped, or whether I arrived anywhere that mattered. My log shows 41 days of ordinary freight runs, ordinary deliveries, ordinary miles. But the fuel was real. The miles were real. And something, for 41 nights, thought they were worth continuing. I still drive the same routes. I still check my fuel gauge before midnight, a habit I formed during those weeks and have not lost. Some nights I find myself watching the clock as it approaches 12. Watching the gauge, some part of me still expecting the needle to swing smoothly to full. It never does anymore. The gauge stays where I left it. I fill my own tank at ordinary fuel stations, at ordinary prices, like an ordinary driver. But I drove 41 nights on fuel that should not have been there, and whatever gave it to me, I am grateful. The road is long and fuel is expensive, and there is a particular kind of grace in being given, without asking exactly what you need to keep going.